started making the Glasgow Rose Bead Embroidered Pendant. This is inspired by a traditional stained glass design, and it's one that transfers very well to bead embroidery. Check out the links below in the description for all the materials that you're going to need and the quantities. So go ahead and check that out, and let's get started. The first step in creating our bead embroidered piece is going to be making the template or a drawing that we can follow to know exactly where we want to put our beads and to help us get to that final picture we're trying to create. So you can see here I have one that I've already started, and here I'm going to show you how I created that. You can see here this is my rose shape with the petals before I have any beads on it. So I have here a piece of my felt that I'm going to use to create the embroidered piece. And I also have here a template. You can use a template like this, or you can use a glass and just turn it upside down. You could use a roll of tape, anything circular or anything in the shape that you want for the outline and for the outside edges and corners of the final piece. So here, because I want to make this circular rose, I have a circle. And with this circle here, I'm just going to place it over my felt, and I'm going to place it so that I'm not wasting a lot of felt. So I'm going to go pretty much up to the corner and just trace that on the inside. I'm going to use a color pen. You can use a pen or a colored pencil, something in the color that is going to match the beads or look good with the beads that you're using in case any of this color shows through on the finished embroidered piece. So now that I have the outside of my rose, I need to do these lines on the inside so that I have something to trace and follow as I embroider. Now I'm going to show you how I made this specific design, but you can really do any design that you want. So I'm going to use this here as a template and recreate it on this one. I have the sections now numbered so that I can make them in the same order in which I made them on my sample here. So my first section, number 1, I made by just creating a simple little line sectioning off part of my circle. So you can see here I'm just going to use the outside edge of my template and create a little half moon shape. And this is going to be the first petal. The second petal here, I went about a quarter of the way inside. I've traced this line about a quarter of the way in from the outside, and then I went to a point on the outside circle here. So I'm going to do the same here. Go about a quarter of the way in, and then just to a point on the outside of my circle here, or towards the outside here. And I'm going to continue here, just following the example that I already have. My third. So now I have all of my outside petals. I'm going to move into the inside here and make my inside petals. You can see here's where I am with 4. And I'm just creating a little triangle here in the corner. And then I want to create that same triangle here, connecting this corner to this corner down here. And keep in mind that although this is how I chose to draw out my rose, you can draw out your rose in whichever way you'd like. You can take a look at some stained glass examples and other embroidery pieces and get an idea of other patterns that work very well for something like this, like a very geometric arts and crafts stained glass vibe. So you can see here I'm just making a series of triangles really that will then end up looking like overlapping petals. And the last one I have here is 9. And then this will be the center where I can fill this in with some crystals and other seed bead colors to make this stand out and be like that, that yellow center that I want, if that's what you want, or you can shade it like another petal with those same colors. So you can see I think I did a pretty good job following my template here. So I'm gonna leave this here for a second. If you want to pause the screen and you want to take a look at what I did here and try to follow along with that. So if you need to, go ahead and pause the video now and take some time to draw out your rose. At this point, you have a finished drawing that you've created with the template. And what I'm going to do now is just simply cut down this piece of felt so that I'm really only working with what I need to work with. I don't have a lot of extra felt. And then I can save these scraps for another project. So now that you've got this cut down, we're gonna start with adding an outline to the very outside here and adding our darkest color beads. So I have my beads up here, all prepared. So these are my beads that I'm going to use, and I have 5 colors ranging from very dark to very light. The dark and the light I have here arranged in exactly the order in which I'll use them, so darkest to lightest. And then my darkest colors here, my 2 dark colors here, are actually 8-O's. I just like the idea of mixing up the textures with the different size beads and the different sizes. I think it just makes it a little bit more visually interesting. You can do all the same size bead, and if you do all the same size bead, I would do 11-O's because you'll be able to have a lot more detail using smaller beads than using larger beads. So to begin the process of adding our beads, you're going to need a needle and a thread. I'm using a size 10 needle and a size 6 or 8. You could use a 6 or an 8 size drawing thread. You're going to end up adding a lot of thread throughout this piece. So if you're one of those people who just doesn't like adding thread, you're going to have to get over that doing bead embroidery, because bead embroidery is something that you're going to constantly be adding thread through. It uses a lot of thread, and it's going to be very, very uncomfortable to cut yourself an extremely long piece of thread and try to work with that. So just cut yourself a comfortable length, and trust me about that. We're going to start here, or I'm going to start here with adding a border of dark beads, my darkest bead here, around the edge of the whole flower, because that's where I want it to be the darkest. Now you can do it a little bit differently. At this point, I'm going to show you how I'm going to make the petals and how I'm going to shade them, but because it's simply embroidery and it's basically creating a mosaic of beads, you can do whatever you want. That's one of the really nice things about bead embroidery. Once you have a concept, you have a design, you can really do anything you want within those lines. It's like having a coloring book here, where then you get to choose whatever colors you want to fill in each section. Here's a very basic way to add your beads. I'm going to start by just poking my needle up on the edge here, and I'm gonna start by following my edge, and just pull that up enough, pull that through enough that you have a little bit of extra tail thread. And yeah, I have another rose on the back there, so in case you were curious, I have another one back there. And I'm gonna just make a simple little stitch here to act as my stop bead. Because I'm not gonna add a stop bead, I'm gonna add essentially a stop stitch. There's different techniques, but this is something that I found is just very easy. So just up and down through your thread or through your felt once, and then that will give you enough of a anchor there that you don't have to worry about pulling your thread out when you put your beads on. We're going to work with a back stitch. So what that means is you're going to add on a series of beads. So I'm going to start with 3, and I'm picking up my 8-ohs because I'm using my darkest color here for the outside. I'm going to pick up 3 beads, and then I'm going to, once I add these, I'm going to back stitch a little bit. Now because this is the first set of beads, I don't have anything to back stitch into. So for these beads, I'm just going to lay them flat, and I'm going to use my forefinger here just to hold that thread down so that I know that my thread is tight against the felt. And I want to push my beads back as far as they'll go, so I know that they're as close to that initial puncture that I made with my needle. And then I'm going to simply go down through my felt right at the edge of my beads and pull that. Oop, make sure you don't get any knots in your thread here. And now as we pull that, your 3 beads should be now nice and tight, close down to the felt. I'm going to then come up behind my beads through the same or very close to that puncture that I first made. Go back through all of those beads. And I'm going to pick up another 3 beads. Same thing here, where I'm going to lay these beads flat so that the beads are following the outline here that I made with my pen. And again, I'm going to take my needle and straight down through the felt just at the end of the last bead and pull that through. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So I'm going to bring my needle up, not at the end of the set of 3 beads, but I'm actually going to go 1 bead back and poke my needle through the felt between what is my 2nd and 3rd bead. So what I'm catching here as I take my needle forward is the set of 3 that I just added, plus the last one from the previous set. And go through those 4 beads and give it a little pull. And I'm going to continue this all the way around. And this is the technique that you're going to use to add all of the beads. So one more time here, picking up 3 of my 8-ohs and letting those fall down and holding those, positioning those so that they sit right on top of that line. And I'm going to poke my needle up here between the fourth 8-oh back and the 5th 8-oh back. So I'm going past, oops, I skipped a step here. So this happens to me sometimes, so if it happens to you, don't feel bad. Forgot to go through my felt again. So just add this needle and thread back on. Okay, here we go. Forgot this important step. I got to go through my felt the first time and get those 3 beads attached. And then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go back, I'm going to trace back my 3 beads plus 1, so I'm picking up that last bead from the previous set. So I'm poking my needle up just past that 4th bead. And then going through those 4 beads and continuing on. So I'm going to continue on here, and because I do want my whole outside row or border to be the darkest color, I'm going to continue like that all the way around until I get a solid row of this 8/0 seed bead. Once you've created the border, you can start creating and filling in each of the petals. I have here one that I've started with the petals, and so you can see here how this petal, this first full petal that I had drawn, that was number 1 in my little diagram, is now filled in with a gradient of seed beads. I have my lightest seed bead all the way towards the inside of my flower, and the darkest colors here facing the outside. So if you continue to work filling in each one of these sections in lines, in rows, starting with the darker seed beads and then moving in towards the lighter, you'll get that nice shading effect that gives you more of the sense of a real 3D flower. Although this is very stained glass inspired, not a Leonardo da Vinci portrait. So I'm going to show you here how I started this section. I like to start with the inside border here, which would be my lightest border, and then work towards the outside. I think this just gives me, I've done it both ways, and I like the way that the beads sit better, and it just helps me get everything aligned and where I want it to be. So I found that that's really the best way to do it for me. I'm going to start on that on the outside border here. So remember, I'm just working on this 1 rose petal. So I've got the outline here on the outside here, which I did for my whole rose. And then this line here is going to be the line that I'm working with to start coloring in this petal. If you are already working with a thread and needle that's attached, you're just simply going to bring your thread and needle up at the very corner of that line, the very end of that line. If not, you can just add a thread and needle just like we did at the beginning. Now what I like to do here is I like to work with the following gradient. Darkest around the edges of each petal, and dark towards the outside of the rose. So you can see here I have my very lightest section here, my very lightest beads are placed on the inside and facing the inside of the flower. And that gives me a template or a style to follow for each individual rose petal, and so that way they all look the same, they all look like they are shaded the same, and it gives you a nice look when you're done. So again, the dark on the outside and the light towards the inside. I'm going to start with my very lightest colors here, and because I want my very lightest color to be on the very inside here, I'm going to take my next lightest color and I'll use that as a border on the outside here. So I'm going to start with this baby pink color, and I'm going to pick up 4 or 5 of my beads. I can pick up more than 3 of my seed beads since they are 11/0s and they're much smaller. And using the same technique, just aligning your seed beads to the line that you've drawn and then coming up behind those beads, passing through them again, and picking up your next set. I'm going to pick up 5 beads and backtrack probably about 2 beads. So I'm laying down that row of 5 beads, and then I'm going to stick my needle up. Oops, I forgot that step again. Now, it's very easy to forget that for me for some reason. But now if you do it, you won't feel bad because you've seen me do it now twice. So I'm going to align these beads here so that they fall right on the line that I've drawn, and make sure that all my beads are touching and there's no space between them. Go down right past the beads there, right at the edge. And then I'm going to bring my needle up through the felt again, backtracking a couple of beads here, and go forward through all my beads and repeat the process. I'm going to continue here, and I'm going to add some of my lighter beads because I want the light towards the very center and top of this petal. So the very inside center of this petal is where I want it to be the lightest. And I'm going to continue here, adding this creamy color. And again, backtracking a couple of beads and going through all of the beads to get me to the end where I need to continue working. So I'm going to continue in this fashion, adding more beads on and progressively getting darker as I work towards the edge. I'm going to continue with this one here and do some more petals, and I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done with a few more petals. Now that I have my petals filled in with my gradient of color, I'm ready to move on to the center. So just one quick note here about the petals. You can see here that I've done all the petals in the same gradient, starting with the lighter colors on the edge of the petal and then working my way back to the darker colors towards the outside of the petal. And you can see how in areas here where the petals overlap, I have the very, very dark color next to the very light color, and that gives it a nice contrast and really distinguishes each petal from each other. So you want to have a nice gradient. You want to have a really light and a really dark, so you get that nice contrast. So now moving on to the center of the flower here. You can continue a gradient in here and fill that in with the same colors as you use for the petals, and that will give it a look as if it's a closed bud. But what we can also do is add some sparkle in there and give it a sense of being the center, like the yellow center of a flower. So you can do this a couple different ways, but I'm going to show you how I choose to do this one in particular. I'm going to use a series of seed beads and some little crystals here. And I chose a kind of bright colored crystal to stand out in the center here. So all I'm going to do, and this is very, very simple, all I'm going to do is take a series of seed beads here, and these are just 11-ohs. I chose this nice gold line crystal, and I don't even necessarily need to count them. I'm just going to pick up a short little series or line of seed beads here, and then wherever they end, I'm going to go back down through my felt on the other side, and then I'm going to pop my needle up on the edge of the felt unfelted section here. So I'm going to come up on the edge, And I'm going to pick up another series of seed beads. And again, you don't necessarily need to count because you're just going to pick up as many as you need to get to the other side here. And maybe an extra one or two. And I'm going to do a bunch of crisscrosses and overlap the seed beads. And what this is going to do is it'll give me a texture in here, and as I overlap and interweave these lines of seed beads, it will give more of a 3D texture to the center, and it should give a nice little bump in the center. Now I can also work in these crystals, of course. I don't want to forget to pick those up. And just going back and forth with the crystals and the seed beads overlapping, sort of like making the lattice on a pie, lattice crust on a pie, but not that orderly. I'm going to be a little bit more random about it. So I'm going to continue and add some more lines in here and build it up, and I'll show you what I have when I'm finished. You can see my center here now complete. And I've done a bunch of crisscrosses. Sometimes I didn't go all the way to the other side if I didn't have to, if I already had a lot of beads built up. I just created this nice little overlapping texture in here, and really just kind of a nice little jumble of beads to mimic the inside of the flower. So now that I'm done with this beading portion of the flower itself, I'm gonna just take my needle and thread here on the back and anchor it in the thread, or anchor it in the felt here by just skimming the surface here of the felt a couple times and just doing a couple superficial stitches there. And then I can cut this thread off. We now want to trim around the rose so that we have very little or almost no felt going past the edge of the beads on the outside. This can be very difficult to do, so definitely take your time and go slowly. I always tend to err on the side of having a little bit of my felt a little too much showing, because then I can always trim it. I can always trim it if I see a spot where maybe I want a little closer, rather than trying to go in too close too fast and accidentally cutting some of your stitches on the back here. So this is pretty good. This is just about where I want it. Now that I have my rose cut out, I'm going to attach it to a backing. So this is a backing here that is like a faux suede. And what I've done here is just take a little bit of E6000. I have this E6000 glue here, and I've applied some to the back. This will also hold all your thread ends in, and I'm going to position my rose so that it is on top of my backing here. But again, I don't want to waste any of the backing, so I'm sort of pushing it to the edge as far as I can. And I want to press that down to make sure that the E6000 adheres. Now what I'm going to do is just take my scissors again and cut out the backing so that it is as close to the same size and shape as the felt as possible. And once I get that done, I'm ready to then start seaming up these edges and doing a brick stitch along the edge. We're now ready to do a brick stitch around the edge and seam up the back, our back here, our suede, our faux suede, and the rest of our piece. So to get started, I'm going to attach my thread. And all I'm going to do to attach my thread, and you can really do this in any number of ways, but I'm going to peel back my suede here, and I usually put my glue in the center so that I don't have glue all the way out to the edges, and that will just make it easier for me when I'm doing my brick stitch. That way I don't have to accidentally push through glue. So I tend to keep my glue in the center. I'm going to peel back a little bit of the edge here and just go through that felt. Oops. I want to leave a little bit of a tail thread. Just go through the felt just enough here that you can then tie it off. I want to do a little tie here so that it's pretty secure because I'm going to be pulling hard when I do this brick stitch. And then I usually take this tail thread and just kind of wrap it around the piece here, around the edge. And I'll tuck that in. That'll get tucked in as I work. So now with my thread attached, I'm going to poke through the felt and come out on the top of my project here. And now I'm going to begin that brick stitch. I'm going to use my 80 seed beads in this darkest color here that I have, just so that it blends in with the edge. But you can really do whatever you want. You can use small pearls, you can do a different type of bead entirely, but I would definitely start with something like an 80 seed bead if you've not done this before, just so that it's easy to practice. And then from there, once you get the hang of it, you can try all kinds of different beads. I'm going to start here by picking up 2 of my 80s, and you can just let those fall down. And then I'm going to go about the space of 2 80s over. I'm going to work to the right, so I'm going about the space of 2 80s to the right. And now I'm going to go slightly diagonally through this backing and through the felt, and I'm going to come out on the front. Before I pull too tight, I'm going to go up through my second seed bead, and I want, once I give it a nice pull, I want my seed beads to be aligned so that their holes are sticking straight up and down. I'm going to then go through the top hole of my first 80, and I'm going to go down through the top there. And now I'm going to do the same thing where I go diagonally through the backing and through the felt and come out on the front. And I'm going to go up through that bead. So up through that first 80 bead. Now because I want to work to the right, I'm going to go again through the second bead. So then I'm working towards my right here, and I'll just redo this stitch that I made. So I'll follow that thread path again and go up through the bead. And now I'm going to add my third bead. So I'm going to pick up one more 80 and let that fall down. Keeping the same spacing here, I'm going to go about the width of one of my 80s over and following that same path where I go diagonally through. And then up through the bottom of that bead, so that when I pull, my beads are all sitting nice and next to each other, and the holes you can see from the side here. So one more time here, I'm going to pick up one of my 80s and let that fall down, and use your previous stitches as a guide so you know about how far over to go and about how far into your backing here you go, and diagonally to the front and up through that bead. If you've done brick stitch before, it's really the same brick stitch you've probably done before, just with some other slight challenges with the backing in there. Now as I work, I will trim as I need to. If I notice some spots where I could fix this so it's a little neater, I'll take care of that in the moment and continue on. So you can see on the back here what this is going to look like, and on the front because I'm using the same color as what I used in the border, it's gonna blend and it's gonna give it just a really nice finished look on the outside. So go ahead and continue all the way around, and then we will talk about what we can do with our lovely rose. Once you've finished making your brick stitch all the way around the outside of your flower, you're going to just connect the first and last 8-0 of that brick stitch. And all you're going to do is just simply go through the first 8-0 that you picked up. So if I'm coming out here of my last 8-0 that I added to complete my circle here, to complete my border, I'm just going to continue on and pass through the first 8-0 that I picked up and go back through your stitch just as if you were adding this bead for the first time, and go up through that bead. And now you'll have a bridge thread connecting the first and the last bead of the brick stitch here. And that will complete your border. You don't want any 8-0s that don't have that bridge thread connecting them. So we do that to connect the first and last bead, and then we've got a completely connected, all together border here. So now that we're done with the border section, we need to decide how we want to use this. You can, if you want, you can simply just glue a backing. So you can glue a pin back, or we can do something with this to make it into a piece that we can hang like a pendant. So for that, because that's what I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to just use some wire guards here and connect some wire guards in a couple places here far enough apart so that when I hang some chain, or if I want to do a beaded necklace and then crimp and attach to my wire guards here, I can have this rose hanging here the way that I want to have it hanging centered on my neck. So you want to think about what you want to do with this rose. If you want to have it hanging more like a pendant, you may want to have your wire guards closer together so that your necklace will then attach here. If you want to have it closer to your neck, higher up, you'll want to place your wire guards on the side here, a little bit farther down. So it's really up to you. You want to think about really what you want to do with this. Or if you want to make multiple pieces like this and connect them, that may be something else that you want to do. So I will show you here how to simply just add a wire guard. Very, very simple. I'm going to make sure that my thread is coming out of one of the 8-0s. And I'm going to pick up one of my 11-0 seed beads. And then I'm going to go through the wire guard. And you're just going to go through one of the little channels on the one side of the wire guard. And back down through the other side of the wire guard, making sure that your thread sits in that little U-shaped channel. Pick up another 11-0, and I'm going to go down through the 8-0 immediately next to the 8-0 where I started. And I'm going to pull all of this nice and tight, and as you do that, make sure that your thread doesn't pop out of that wire guard. Make sure that your thread is sitting in that channel on top of the wire guard. And then all I'm going to do here is go up through the first 8-0, 11-0, and wire guard, and reinforce this by going through the other side of the wire guard, the 11-0 and the 8-0 again. And making sure that my thread goes in that wire guard. And I'm going to do this a third time. If you have a thinner thread, you may want to do this 4 or 5 times. Although I am a big fan of reinforcing things, so I think I tend to overdo it. I'm going to do this 3 times, and that should be pretty good. And as long as you don't have any thread showing, then you're in really good shape. You're not going to have, you don't have any chance of it coming loose. If you have any slack in your thread, you want to make sure that you pull your thread tight so that you don't have that slack, and this ends up migrating and pulling farther away from your design. So now I'm just going to tie off my thread. You can do this a number of different ways here, but what I'm going to do is just go through one of my stitches back here and just simply make a little overhand knot through using one of my stitches here. And then what I like to do is go back through that puncture where I have my stitch going through to the front. And because I have so many beads on the front here, what I like to do is then take my needle and thread and trace through some of the beads in the bead embroidery itself and tie off my thread somewhere in the beads on the front, just like you would with a bead weaving project. And as I mentioned, I tend to maybe overdo it with the reinforcements, but I don't want to ever worry about something coming apart. So at this point, I've now got it knotted in a couple different places, and I took my thread, my tail thread or my extra thread here through some of the beads on the front. So I'm going to just now burn this thread down and burn that thread down so that you can't see it anymore. And there is my one wire guard attached. So I'm just going to now attach a new piece of thread and decide where I want to attach the second wire guard, which will probably be right here, because I want my rose to hang just like this. So I'm going to go ahead and just attach this second wire guard here, and then my piece will be complete. If you enjoyed this tutorial and you're looking for some more tutorials on beading and some different jewelry making techniques, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications.